missing a
So
chair.
you're over there.
We're missing a chair. I think we're good.
I'm here.
1, 2, 3,
Yes.
4, 5. There's one at the end. There's one at the end.
You're over there. No.
Oh, that's right. He's.
So you're gonna move.
Are these suckers on? They're ready? Channel 0? We're good? Yeah.
So
Okay.
Francesco, you have to move. There you go. And then I'll take this chair. Yes, exactly. You see that. Yes. We're doing girl, boy, girl. Ah, okay. You missed that bit.
Francesco, 5 minutes. Everybody.
Salve, prima di tutto grazie per essere qui stamattina. Sappiamo che è un orario molto presto di domenica mattina, quindi un ringraziamento veramente speciale per essere qui con noi. Prima di iniziare 2 paroline. La prima, il panel sarà quasi completamente in inglese, quindi ci sono fuori delle cuffie con i traduttori simultanei, se ne avete bisogno penso che sia il caso di andarli a prendere ora prima che iniziamo. Il secondo punto, una presentazione necessaria. Cos'è IFAD? IFAD è un'agenzia delle Nazioni Unite, è l'unica agenzia delle Nazioni Unite che si occupa che ha un portafoglio finanziario, che si occupa di concedere prestiti per lo sviluppo agricolo. È un'agenzia specializzata per l'incremento delle attività agricole nei Paesi membri. I Paesi membri dell'IFAD sono 181. È un'agenzia che esiste da oltre 30 anni e ogni anno concede prestiti per circa $1 miliardo. Siamo oggi qui in un panel di persone molto esperte, persone che hanno vissuto sulla propria pelle quelle che sono le politiche agricole, che possono raccontare le storie non raccontate delle politiche agricole. Perché questo panel è importante? La prima domanda. Perché quello che avete mangiato stamattina a colazione è quello di cui parleremo qui oggi. Come spesso tutto ciò che viene sottovalutato, ovvero la nostra alimentazione quotidiana, è un elemento di guerre, è un elemento di lotte tra multinazionali, è un elemento di sviluppo. E lo faremo con Frederick Kaufman, autore di Bad Farm. Si è occupato di politiche alimentari per NBC, Fox, è professore di giornalismo alla City University di New York. Lo faremo con Massimo Alberizzi, che è direttore di African Express. È una firma del Corriere, inviato speciale in Africa per tanti anni. È stato un consulente per le Nazioni Unite per quanto riguarda le armi in Somalia. Lo faremo con Ian McGillivray, consigliere particolare del presidente dell'IFAD. Ian ha 35 anni di esperienza nelle politiche di sviluppo agricolo e rurale. La sua esperienza, la sua condivisione di quello che ha visto nel corso di quegli anni sarà un tassello fondamentale, così come sarà un tassello fondamentale quello che ci dirà Sipo Moio, direttrice per l'Africa di One. Sipo lavora da 18 anni nel campo dello sviluppo. La sua lunga esperienza nella Banca Africana dello Sviluppo, nelle Nazioni Unite, alla Banca Mondiale, sarà un elemento, di un punto di vista fuori dal coro, di quello che spesso i media non riescono neanche a raccontare. Abbiamo Antonella Cardone, consulente tecnico dell'IFAD e coordinatrice per le questioni indigene e tribali, che ci porterà ancora un altro punto di vista, cioè ci lascerà abbandonare dietro di noi quelle che sono le definizioni classiche dietro le quali nascondiamo il termine di indigeno e tribale. Finito questo breve giro di presentazioni, ricordo l'ultima cosa e lo ricordo prima di uscire. Se volete ci sono delle borse e delle descrizioni dell'IFAD, del lavoro che fa l'IFAD, sono vicino alla porta, quindi a fine panel se volete approfondire abbiamo a disposizione. Struttureremo questo panel in questo modo: ci sarà un primo giro di domande con i relatori e ad un certo punto vorrei che foste anche voi ad intervenire, a condividere con noi quelli che sono i vostri dubbi, le vostre sensazioni su quello che avete ascoltato. Okay. Okay. No, I was just wondering. Now we have to switch in English, and I would like to start from Fred. Yes, we said yesterday, I can call you Fred. The panel is called Untold Stories. Why are those stories untold by the media? What's happening and why we should tell them, why we should talk about it?
Thank you, Francesco. The food story, maybe 20 years ago, when I started writing, was a much simpler and more direct story, and it dealt specifically with what we eat and how we eat it and how we prepare it. But since then, with the advent of the notion of food politics, it's become a much more complicated story, and particularly with the notion of climate change coming into the mix, what we're seeing is the idea of global scarcity coming back the way it first occurred in the late 1960s. And so when there is scarcity, all of a sudden food becomes a different story. And part of the story that I've been covering is the money story. Because when something is scarce, then all of a sudden it can cost more, and all of a sudden all sorts of people who are not necessarily interested in food become interested, and I mean like Wall Street bankers, large multinational investors. So a typical example of the untold story of food then would be last year when I was traveled to Ethiopia, to the conflict zone near Gambela in South Sudan, to follow the land investment of an Arab sheikh named Mohammed al-Amaoudai, who's one of the richest men on earth, who is involved in a land grab right now in southern western Ethiopia. Because the food story and the energy story and the money story and the water story have all become one story. And so this gentleman is in the process of taking hundreds of thousands of hectares of land in a country where there are millions of hungry people, and using that land to farm and to send that water from the Nile Basin encapsulated in grains of rice to feed his compatriots in Saudi Arabia. So all of a sudden the food story becomes a political story, it becomes a money story, it becomes a story of indigenous populations who have been marginalized in Gambela. It becomes a story of climate change. It becomes a story of internal and external foreign affairs and foreign exchange. And so I guess that's what we're getting at here, Francesco, that the food story as we progress in these times has become a much more complicated, in-depth, and really one of the extraordinary stories of our time.
Thanks, Fred. Ian, one of the things that we discussed yesterday is that often we use the word out of sight, out of mind. This framework leads Western countries sometimes to not consider what's happening in rural areas and do not consider all the problem of small farmers in rural areas. Would you talk a little bit about this and what we could do?
Sure. This is on for the translators anyway. Well, let me start off by I think congratulating you for being here on a Sunday morning. That's something that we were a little bit feeling really, really good when we saw more people coming into this room. We were worried that maybe there'd only be 2 or 3 of you. So first, let me applaud you for being here, but let me also get you to reflect a little bit what it was like for you this morning. Some of you probably missed breakfast. Breakfast is obviously something that came from habit, part of our culture, but also because we were hungry. And probably many of you didn't really think about where that food came from. You didn't have to worry about whether or not you were going to be able to eat. And I'm doing this only mainly for you to relate to food from the perspective of this being something that we, luckily, who are here, don't really have to worry too much about that. I'm sure that many of you have friends and colleagues who don't have jobs and worry about how to get food on the table and how to make sure that we can meet our daily needs. But the fact that you are here today means that something very important happened to you as you were growing up. Meaning that you had good brain development, you were able to, like all of us, think and reason and go to school and learn. There are many who are not so lucky. And the sad thing is, I guess those of us who are parents, especially mothers, know that mothers, when one suddenly becomes pregnant, planned or not, it's important from that moment on, before giving birth, that one has all of the nutrients you need, not only for the mother, but for the child. The point I'm trying to make here is that food has to be there for the mother, for the father, for the children. But it's fundamental, especially for the newborn child. And there is a window, and it's a magic window, because if you add up the days of the 9 months of pregnancy, more or less, and then the 2 years following birth, that makes about 1,000 days. If during those 1,000 days, the children don't get enough micronutrients, they don't get enough vitamins and minerals, enough carbohydrates and proteins coming through, if you like, the umbilical cord while the baby is pregnant, or later on following breastfeeding up until the 2 years, that child will have learning disabilities, that child will have problems of thinking and educating and to be educated. So beyond this being a human problem of, at this moment, we have 160 million children in the world who are at this stage, we call it stunting. It's a characteristic of a child being too short for its age. And there are many ways that one can try to see what the magnitude of the problem is. But beyond you here saying, well, why is this important to me? Well, the unfortunate circumstance is that most of these children and most of the hundreds of millions of people who do worry about where their next meal is going to come from, they live in faraway places. And as they live in faraway places, we say, well, why is that relevant to me? It's not nearby. So you can care about them if we have a human feeling. But there's another important reason why they're important. In my career, I've realized that if you help people where they are, and they grow and they prosper, they, like us, may want to travel, but the important thing is that people find opportunities often where they live, maybe like 100, 200 years ago. And I think for us, in a world where movement is important, trade is important, I think the important thing to realize is that helping people prosper and grow where they live is a natural human tendency. And therefore, my trying to make the connection is that we can say, well, these people are too far away, so we shouldn't worry about them. The important thing is that not only do we have human caring, but we care about them being able to live a good life where they live. Thank you.
Sipo, as Ian said, normally we don't care about our breakfast. Like people in this room probably, we just wake up and have breakfast, don't even think about it. So when we don't think about it, in a way you may do not care where the food comes from and do not understand if we do any mistake, meaning like as Western countries, in our food policies or helping other countries with their food policies. Could you tell us any big mistake or bunch of mistakes made by Western countries in trying to hate countries with food problems.
Thank you, Francesco. Good morning, everyone. So I'm here to bring you the stories, the untold stories of those faraway people that Ian just talked about.
Mike.
Okay, is it better? Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm here to bring you the stories of those faraway people that Ian just mentioned about. And one of those faraway places is Africa, and that's where I come from. And because today we're talking about the politics of food, it is actually a political issue. And we all know what happens in politics. You have lobby groups, and you have bigger groups that are not lobby groups. And one of those groups that I want to talk about is the smallholder farmers, who are actually 70% of the African population, and yet because they are so dispersed and not organized into a lobby group, they tend to lose out on the politics of food, or the politics of food security, because they're not able to speak for themselves or to defend themselves. And that's what an organization like mine, called One, does. We're an advocacy organization, and we're speaking for the smallholder farmers in Africa. Because for a long time, as Francesca said, the voice of the smallholder farmers has not been heard. The importance of investing in agriculture has been neglected. So in a sense, if you look at all sort of the different areas of human endeavor, in terms of social policy or social services, agriculture has almost been the stepchild. There's a lot of money, well, maybe not enough, but health gets its fair share sometimes, education does. But agriculture has really suffered because you have this group of people who are almost voiceless. As I said, they constitute 70% of the population of Africa. They produce 80% of the food that we eat, and yet they can barely sustain themselves. And the reason for that is that they're getting bad prices. They're getting very poor prices because you have middlemen who come and rip them off, and it's the middlemen who are getting rich. So someone is getting rich from agriculture in Africa, but it's not the farmers, it's not the people who produce the food. So we're working on making sure that, first of all, the African governments are accountable to the farmers, to the smallholder farmers, but also making sure that the Western countries, as Francesca just pointed out, are doing their share in terms of contributing to helping African farmers. One of the things that hurts African farmers is the subsidies in the Western countries. Francesca just asked me, what is the jeopardy? So the subsidies in the Western countries tend to hurt small farmers in African countries because African countries are not providing the same level of subsidies for their farmers. So what we're asking at this point is for African governments to put more money into agriculture so as to help the small farmers have better access to services. So that means investing in research and development so that farmers have access to extension services, ensuring that there is security of tenure on the land and people have title and rights to their land, because when they have that, they feel more confident to invest and grow food on their land. They also can use that land tenure or that documentation, the legal right to the land, to access credit. And if they can access credit, they can grow their business. So we think that's also important. We also want to make sure that the governments are investing in the training of small farmers so that they can do better, bring the new technology to them, bring the better methods of farming and so on to the smallholder farmers. So there's a number of things, there's a number of reasons why it's important. Another thing is to eliminate the gender gap in agriculture, because what we find is that acre for acre, women are producing much less than their male counterparts, and yet women are 50% of the farmers. And why is this? That's because maybe the extension services, the extension workers come at exactly the time when the women are trying to prepare food for their families, look after their babies, and so on. So the timing of the service provision is sometimes probably not convenient. So those are the things that need to be looked into. It's also possible that they're not, producing as much. Maybe they don't get as much fertilizer. There's a lot of, different issues there that need to be part of the smart policy interventions that we're looking for from government. So we're saying, put the money on the table, increase the investment in agriculture, but also underpin it with smart policies like targeting, the gender gap, targeting the smallholder farmers. Something you don't know about Africa is that it's a very young continent. 70% of Africans are under the age of 35. And the question you have to ask yourself is, where are the jobs going to come from? Even more dismal is the fact that 10 million young Africans join the labor market every single year, and not nearly enough jobs are being created. So there's a lot to talk about in the food politics, and perhaps Francesca wants me to stop now and continue later when questions come. But someone talked about your breakfast this morning. Did you think about where it was coming from? You probably know that in Africa, a lot of people are dying from HIV and AIDS. You probably know that a lot of people are dying from malaria. But what you don't know is that, almost 50% of the child mortality, the children that die before the age of 5 in Africa, half of them are actually dying from hunger. I mean, really, half of them are dying from hunger. And this is in a continent where, basically the weather is good, the majority of people are farmers, but children are still dying of hunger. And those that don't die from hunger, the majority of them actually suffer from the thing that Ian just talked about, which is stunting. Because of poor nutrition, their development is curtailed or arrested. Their learning capability is affected, and ultimately their earning potential it impacts their whole lives, essentially. It impacts their life expectancy, their earning capacity, and a number of things. So maybe I'll stop there, and then we can talk a little bit more again when it's question time. Is that okay?
Perfect. As Sipo said, Massimo, she brought in an interesting subject that is government, this politics. You've been for so many years in Africa now, and I think one of the interesting things that you could tell us is how the dark side of the moon, how corruption, how bribes got into the food policies, and what's the big trouble that you saw when you were there?
Yes.
No,
Hello? Oh, yes. So just that the audience is Italian. If you want, I can talk in Italian, if you don't mind, even if you miss my fashionable Italian accent. But I think that the people, I can speak better, and the people also can understand better, if you don't mind, if the audience is okay. Sì, il problema della corruzione è un problema enorme, ma il problema anche delle guerre che ci sono in Africa. Io vedo già i generali, quando studiano una guerra, che contano sicuramente i Kalashnikov, contano sicuramente i cannoni, ma contano anche il cibo, che possono, come utilizzare il cibo contro le popolazioni o a favore delle popolazioni. Ho vari esempi di questo, sono stato parecchie volte. Adesso, se voi, vi ho preparato delle diapositive al volo, sono solo la situazione che c'era in Ogaden qualche anno fa. La situazione era drammatica e la popolazione viveva in questo modo. C'era una guerra, c'è ancora una guerra con il fronte di liberazione dell'Ogaden somalo, e in qualche modo si riusciva a fare arrivare del cibo, perché non c'era assolutamente nulla. Non c'era niente, questo era il porto di Assab da cui partiva il cibo ed era totalmente vuoto a causa della guerra che c'era tra Etiopia ed Eritrea. Il cibo viene portato attraverso Djibouti, ecco qui, viene portato attraverso Djibouti e viene mandato in Ogaden. Ecco, questo cibo non si è potuto distribuire. Perché? Perché il governo impediva di distribuirlo nelle zone controllate dai guerriglieri. I guerriglieri non volevano che il cibo entrasse nelle loro zone perché così tenevano sotto giogo e sotto controllo le popolazioni locali, quindi le costringevano comunque in qualche modo a favorire e a parteggiare per il fronte di liberazione, e quindi la situazione diventava sempre, ogni giorno più drammatica, e il cibo c'era ma non si poteva distribuire. Altro caso attualissimo invece è in Sud Sudan, che citava prima Fred. In Sud Sudan in questo momento ci sono 1 milione di persone che sono in condizioni di miserabili, non c'è cibo, non c'è acqua, no, l'acqua probabilmente c'è ma è tutta inquinata, e comunque cosa c'è? Siccome è una guerra che comunque è diventata etnica, io non credo alle guerre etniche, ma dovrei aprire una parentesi e poi Francesco mi bacchetta, e comunque vengono utilizzate le tribù, una tribù contro l'altra. Il governo che diciamo favorisce una delle tribù impedisce che nei campi profughi, nelle sue zone controllati dalle Nazioni Unite, e quindi perché sono sotto protezione delle Nazioni Unite, venga distribuito il cibo alla gente che c'è dentro, che è dell'altro gruppo. Cinicamente quello che succede anche in Somalia oggi con gli Shebab, le zone controllate dagli Shebab, non può entrare il cibo e la gente muore. Non può entrare un cibo, le organizzazioni non governative sono state cacciate, quindi non c'è neanche un'assistenza medica, ma questo fa parte anche questo di un altro discorso. Comunque il cibo non può entrare e quindi le popolazioni sono in condizioni disperate e stanno morendo. Peraltro questo tipo di politica è stata utilizzata in altre moltissime guerre, per esempio in Darfur, un'altra guerra di cui si parla in questo momento poco, perché è dal 2004, quindi ormai da 10 anni che in Darfur si combatte una guerra. Io sono stato parecchie volte già anche allora, e nelle zone controllate dove c'è la presenza di quelli che si chiamano Janjaweed, che sono delle milizie filogovernative, non può entrare il cibo, perché loro, se ci sono i convogli anche delle Nazioni Unite, li attaccano perché il cibo non sia distribuito. Quindi il senso di questo è il bisogno alimentare e il cibo che viene utilizzato come un'arma. Noi siamo abituati, e qui l'untold story, noi siamo abituati di parlare di Kalashnikov, di bullets, di cannoni, ma invece noi stessi giornalisti alcune volte non affrontiamo questo argomento come dovrebbe essere affrontato profondamente, perché lo consideriamo forse marginale, perché i morti per ferite, il sangue comunque è più d'impatto nei media rispetto a uno che muore di fame solamente, e quindi non sottovalutiamo il fatto che il cibo è un'arma e viene utilizzato con un'arma. Più tardi, se volete, vi racconto cosa faceva la Dole in Somalia, però adesso mi fermo perché sennò Francesco si arrabbia. Become very angry.
Antonella, Massimo just brought in an interesting subject that is about tribu, indigenous people. We only talk about indigenous people when there's a war, to say that they're fighting against each other. But there are many other subjects about it, and also about their development. Could you just tell us a bit more about it?
Io parlerò in inglese perché purtroppo lavoro solo ed esclusivamente in inglese, quindi non ho un linguaggio tecnico, ma prima di partire in inglese volevo ringraziarvi per essere qui numerosissimi. E la storia che io vi voglio raccontare è la storia non detta dei popoli indigeni. So I will continue now in English to tell you...
Possiamo fare una battuta? In
Yes.
realtà lei non conosce i termini in italiano, ce l'ha confessato ieri, quindi devi per forza dire in inglese, per questo fare il panel in inglese, però già un po', confessiamolo.
Sì, non è per snobismo, ma è veramente, devo tradurre, quindi faccio un mix di inglese e italiano che insomma non onora nessuna delle due lingue.
Che è un onore alla tua esperienza, però diciamo.
Che?
È un onore alla tua esperienza aver lavorato tanti anni.
Potremmo parlare di imperialismo linguistico, ma insomma dobbiamo fare un altro panel su questo. E soprattutto vi voglio parlare di diversità. So, we hear and we listen about indigenous peoples when there are conflicts. Like Massimo was saying, when their lands are grabbed, when they're fighting against multinationals who want to do a dam or a mine in their lands. But we never hear, and the story is never told, about how indigenous peoples are a great resource today and how modern they are. But let's start to understand who they are. And since we have mainly an Italian audience, I'll just mention few names that are common in Italy, like the Maasai, for instance, who are indigenous peoples and who live and who are still alive. It doesn't matter how can be marginalized in their countries or other things, that they are not marginalized at all. In Latin America, the Maya, I'm sure we have heard about Maya people. We have heard about the Quechua, the Aymara. We have heard about the Pygmies. We have heard about the indigenous peoples and the tribes in India. Now, on the world today, we estimate that there are about 3,700,000 indigenous peoples. They speak about 4,000 of the 6,000 languages spoken on Earth. What does this tell us? It tells us that the world is diverse, that there is a variety, and this is a richness to the world. But if we think what we eat and how many plants we eat today, I get scared because we only eat 30 plants. And this is a question I will ask Freddie. Why? Why economically we only concentrate on 30 plants to eat, and how insecure we become to climate shocks if the entire humanity is fed by 30 plants? Now, diversity of people responds to biodiversity, to diversity of crops, to diversity of food in each of these communities which are still alive. And this is why they're very important. And let me tell you a simple story from one of the participants to an IFAD-funded project in Bolivia. The name of the lady is Doña Viviana. Doña Viviana lives on the lake Titicaca, and she's the custodian of 105 species of potatoes. Now, how many potatoes do we know in Italy? I think I can only buy a couple. But there are out there 4,000 species of potatoes. And Doña Viviana, every year, she keeps the seeds of 107 species. And let me tell you, you cannot find those species in the market. These are not a commodity. They are not sold. They are a treasure. They are exchanged among the people themselves. And this is the untold story. This is the richness of the diversity of people in the world. Before we finish this panel, I really would like to touch on why indigenous peoples are modern today. Because their approach to life, their approach to food is holistic. I hope it's not a too technical term. Where are my colleagues here? But it means that when we talk about food, it's not only food. It's environment, it's culture, it's spirituality, it's economy. And this is all together. It's not the simple package we buy in the supermarket, but it's the sacred of food. And we can speak about indigenous peoples and we can understand only if we understand that for them, Earth is Mother Earth, is Pachamama, is Madre Terra. So it's our relative, is the mother that nourishes us and which we need to nourish, to give it back. But this is not what's behind the food and the industrial food production and the food seen as a commodity today. There is a fantastic lady she's a Native American, Winona LeDuc. You can Google her TED's talk in 2011. And I was struck by Winona's talk when she said that they have fought against multinationals because multinationals were trying to patent their wild rice. And their argument was, you cannot patent our relative. The wild rice is our brother. We have brother with wings, we have brother with roots. We are brothers, our mother is the earth. You cannot patent our relative, and most of these cases have been won. The Maori people in Australia have done the same. They have sued multinational because the multinational had patented their rice, which was called Peru Peru, and they won the cases. And actually, this was fantastic because this rice was coming from the Peru. So they then joined together with indigenous peoples in Peru, and the Peruvian people were thanking them for having saved their sacred food. I think I may stop here, but we'll continue later to tell the story of indigenous peoples and their foods. Thank you.
Can I respond to what? I just want to respond to what Antonella was saying about the maybe only one or two potatoes out there when in fact there are so many species of potatoes. And clearly the issue has to do with biodiversity versus monoculture. But I think one of the most important untold stories of food is the fact that what we are eating is, for the most part, unbeknownst to most people, intellectual property. In other words, the food that we're eating is to a great extent patented property of large multinational companies. That's just the simple truth. The potatoes, the apples, across the board. So in other words, one of the reasons that we are eating a very limited group of foodstuffs is because those foodstuffs are owned and patented on our profit streams for large multinational corporations. And we're not just talking about the very infamous genetically modified corn or soy, but really across the board, what we're talking about are hybrid varieties which become profit streams. And this is why, as journalists, one of the terms that we have to interrogate very intensely when it comes to food is this whole notion of what Sipo is talking about, which is investment. Because this is a much exploited term. It's a much exploited term today in terms of global food. Because investment to a Monsanto or a Nestle or a Kraft is one thing. Investment to Sipo in terms of smallholders in Africa is another. Investment in global commodities means another thing to large multinational banks like Goldman Sachs or Deutsche Bank or Barclays, who have gone long in commodities and have raised the price of global food. Investment in food and the price rising means another thing to the CIA and to other groups that are interested in regime change and driving regime change through food inflation. And so what we have here is we have a whole scheme of investment being turned and twisted depending on who you're talking to, so that as the food price rises, well, that's a good idea to invest in land in Iowa, when in fact maybe what we're doing is we're not planting food there anyway. We're just waiting for that price of that very rich farmland to rise. And so as journalists, we have to be very focused on these terms and really understand what lies behind when Goldman says we're investing in food, what Mohammed Al-Amoudi says we're investing in food, or when Sipo says we need to invest in food.
Great. Can I take it from there, please? Thank you. So, indeed, let me talk a little bit about, when I talk about investing in smallholder farmers, we're currently running a campaign at one, and it's called Do Agric, It Pays, and I'd love you to go and, sign that petition, actually, and, help us to put the pressure on the African governments. And this is why we're running the campaign. What the campaign is doing is it's asking African leaders to put 10% of their national budgets in agriculture. And the reason we want them to do this is to make sure that the smallholder farmers have access to credit, to make sure that the smallholder farmers have access to research and development through extension services, to make sure they're secure on their land, and all of those kinds of things, to make sure that the women are protected as farmers in the agriculture sector. And the reason we're asking the African leaders to do this is because they actually made the same commitment in 2003, and they have not kept that promise. And now, with the advent of social media and new technology and all of that, we really are raising the awareness so that people know what their governments have promised and can hold them to account on those promises. And it's important for government to be able to do that, to put that investment on the table, because it is that kind of investment that will not only leave smallholders better off, but it will also create jobs for those 10 million young people I talked about. And look, we get it. We know that not every young person wants to be a farmer. So it's not just about making everyone go into farming. It's also about developing the private sector, developing the value chain of agriculture so that young people can see viable opportunities to go into agribusiness. There's packaging, there's input supplying, there's transportation, there's processing into finished goods. There's a lot in the value chain that young people can take advantage of. And most importantly, when government invests in agriculture, it gives comfort to private sector, big private sector, whether it's domestic or international, to come in and support the smallholder farmers, come in and build anchor farms, which can help the smallholder farmers to conglomerate and, be able to sort of get the economies of scale by bringing the produce together, having it transported at the same time, and that sort of thing. So that's why this is really important. For us, it's about ending extreme poverty in our lifetime. And that's why we're really focusing on this. And of course, we're trying to reach at least 10 million people through this campaign, get at least 1 million signatures, so that when the African leaders go to meet in June, at the end of June, they have a summit twice a year, one in January and one in June, at the African Union, which is the equivalent of the European Union. So that when they meet in June, the pressure will be on for them to put some skin in the game and help the smallholder farmers. And guess what? What's good for the farmers is actually good for the African governments, because when farmers are better off, when young people have jobs, when the private sector comes in, it just means that government has bigger revenues and can actually provide the rest of the social services that government has a responsibility to provide, like health, like education, and so on. So all of these things are really linked together, and it's all about ending extreme poverty in Africa so that, we can all prosper.
May I? I'm sorry. Nice, but theoretical only. In reality, what happened? That they grab the land, the government, and give the land to the Chinese factories, a firm, very big. So it's theoretical, it's very nice, very good idea.
It's not theoretical, it's a campaign. We want it to happen.
Okay, we can organize a campaign, that's okay. But of course, it's a contrary what happened. In Uganda, there are the grab of the land, and they will give the land to the Chinese, to the big company, the big multinational. Congo, the government of Congo doesn't control the country. So how they can put in practice any politics of agriculture? That is a real problem.
I'm sorry.
We can campaign together.
I don't want you guys to go away thinking that Africa is the wild, wild west. There are a few bad leaders, but the whole continent is not like that.
No,
and
that's
yes.
But you
So
live in a nice country.
I want you guys
live in Europe. South Africa is Europe. It's not, not Africa.
I've lived in North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and Southern Africa, and I do not want this group of young people to go away thinking that Africa is doomed and there is no hope. That's why we're pushing for. That's why we're pushing for democracy. That's why we're pushing for transparency of land deals. The governance of land is very important to this campaign, and it's really about making sure that the citizens know the kind of contracts that their governments are signing, and that's why the people in Gambela in Ethiopia are fighting the multinationals. So we want to make sure that this wild, wild west thing stops.
But it's the reality, my dear. It's the reality. This.
That's why
So you cannot. You have not to miss the reality. This is the reality. We can fight against the reality.
Sure.
The corruption is not corruption in Africa. Tell me.
There's corruption in Italy. There's
Of
corruption
course.
everywhere.
Yes, but not at a low level. When you arrive at the airport in Malpensa, they give out the passport and they ask for money to get back the passport, to give back the passport to you.
Let's go back to the food and not the
Yeah.
passports.
Yeah, I would like to stop you also because Antonella would like to add something more. And
But
I
you know
completely-
that I love
No, I know that you're just like trying to animate a little bit the debate.
Exactly.
And this was interesting, by the way, also having different point of views and also sharing and telling the guys that are here that, as I completely agree with you, Africa is not the World Wide West. And
Thank you.
Just to, not to add fire, but to put, I think that Africa is so interesting to the world at the moment that everybody is trying to go to Africa and use the resources that are there. On the other side, Africans are trying to find their own solutions without having a new colonization which is most played on food and land. But aside for this, the issue I wanted to touch upon is that Sipo mentioned poverty and Massimo mentioned land grabbing. Now, these are two important issues for indigenous peoples in the world. I told you before that indigenous peoples number about 5% of the world population. But then when we come to the statistics on poverty, they reach 15%. And this is why they are important to IFAD, not simply because they are indigenous, but because often they are the poorest in the countries they live. But on the other side, they are the richest. Why? Because if you take the world map and you overlap the map of biodiversity and where it is richest, this is where indigenous peoples live. But it's not by chance. They have been maintaining that for thousands of years, for millennia. But what is happening now? It's the land grabbing. Because that reach, the Amazon, is so rich of natural resources, of minerals, that this is the new frontier that we need to go and get the resources from. And what do? We simply displace indigenous peoples, and this is their fight that they're conducting at the moment.
Can I respond to Antonella again?
Yeah.
Which is that I think that a lot of the food story that we see in journalism deals with issues of, let's say, local food, local sourcing, artisanal food, green markets versus global food, food from nowhere, very large supply chains. Okay, so that's a story that we see repeated again and again and again. But what we're seeing here is this whole notion of global food and local food having a whole different set of ramifications. So, for instance, when we're talking about African governance, what is of interest to large political powers in Africa is, of course, the ability to get loans from the International Monetary Fund, from the World Bank. In order to do such a thing, they need to have heavy reserves of foreign or non-African currency in their central banks. And one of the ways in which they're accomplishing this and their own development stories within Africa is through foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment also often means allowing people from China, people from India, people from all over the world to come in and to develop the land agriculturally. And so it's a very complex system of foreign exchange, loans, agricultural development, which turns into often indigenous peoples getting really the nasty side of the stick, and smallholders being completely marginalized. Yet, how does it read? It reads as though these governments are getting loans and are developing. And so this is what, as journalists, we have to try to penetrate. We have to penetrate through this miasma of investment, food, currency, and international governance, because the stories have become intertwined.
Ian, going back to local issues, one of the big problems is also that also Sifo talked about was it's about security of the tenants. You know, everyone, like we've been talking about multinational, global economy, but in everyday life, many people, the tenants that want to be small farmer, have a problem of security. What do you think? What should be the right thing to do? What should be the right policy?
Well, I guess like you, I've been listening to this conversation, and I couldn't help thinking, how do we try to organize this? How do we establish some sort of order? And the immediate thing that came to mind is, luckily, as we've moved forward, as the world has moved forward, we have created different ways of trying to organize how we try to address some of these very complex problems. And I am very fortunate at this stage of my life, if you like, having spent many years for the Canadian government and now working for, if you like, the president of IFAD, who is an African leader. He comes from Nigeria. So here we have the wonderful story of about how concerned we can be about a part of the world where most of the 1,000 million people don't know where our breakfast is going to come from, to make a comparison. And we have an African leader who has grown within the international system, is now as the head of one of the most important United Nations organizations that tries to help these kind of problems. So we, in our work, focus on farmers, smallholder farmers, foresters, fishers, indigenous people. And so we were set up about 30 years ago when there was an earlier food crisis in the 1970s. And it was very similar. It was caused by problems on the price of oil, in addition to many of the other problems that caused this last world food crisis that led, in fact, your country to be the host of the G8 in L'Aquila, that pledged a lot of money of support to try to help food security and nutrition. Now, in addressing all of these problems, the best thing that one can do, even if one writes about these things, is try to see how one can organize one's thoughts. Because when things are too complex, how does one tell the story? And I think the beautiful thing about IFAD is that we are extremely focused. And while we're affected by the concerns in low-income countries, by fragile states that are continually moving into the kind of problems that Maximo was talking about, of countries where there is a lot of corruption, they're unstable, there's a lot of warfare going on. In our organization, those countries who are our members, some of them may be going through some of these conflicts. Now those countries going through conflicts where there is corruption, where they don't pay their loans, they can still be a member of IFAD, but they no longer can get any more money from us, or any more help, any more loans, any more grants. So it is a way, coming back to my earlier thought, is that as we try to keep our world to be a civilized world, we try to set these norms and standards of whereby we have these IFADs in this world that try to provide the support. Now the United Nations is very specialized. We don't address problems of emergency. We don't address problems of conflict. That's not our specialization. What we try to do is to make sure, as our colleague from ONE has mentioned, is that the countries invest in their own people, which is what we want of all of our governments. And why are we talking so much about agriculture? I mean, when you have a little bit of money, you put it in the bank where you can get the greatest return. When you invest in agriculture, you get the greatest return. There is no other investment in these low-income countries where they can get greater economic growth than they can from agriculture. So it makes common sense. In English, I don't know if you translate that in Italian, but we call it a no-brainer. It provides the farmer with income and nutrition, and it provides the economy with the kind of resources that they need to prosper.
Can I just put a number to that impact, that multiplier effect that Ian is talking about? When you invest in agriculture, the payoff, he said it pays, the payoff is 11 times more effective at reducing poverty than growth in any other sector, including mining and oil. So I just wanted to put that number.
Before we finish and we give the chance to the people, to the audience, to ask us a few questions, I would like to ask you, to all of you, a really very last question, and I would like you to give a very short answer. So maybe I should start from Massimo. So as you said before that South Africa is Europe. Believing there, I may disagree in a way because I still remember a few places that are actually far away from Europe. But still, if you could give to the audience like a very short story, like the other side of South Africa, which is the African countries where you went, where you saw, let's say, the worst food war.
I don't want the people to become very angry with me after that. No, there are many examples that you can get from where the food doesn't work and they steal the food. If you go to Somalia, for example, you have the food to deliver in the areas controlled by the warlords, and they ask for money when you pass the checkpoint, which means that with that money, they use the money to buy, when I say the bullet, to kill the people that you go to feed. So this is terrible. I don't know where to solve this problem. I can mention this and they can tell the story, but it's very difficult to say what you do. You see there that there is a people that is starving at the corner, and you have to pass the checkpoint to deliver the food. You don't give the food. You think that you take the shoulder and you go to the other way. This is one of the problem that you have to talk about and to think how to solve. This is one. Okay? No, I can, if you want, I can talk about other stories.
No, it's fine.
The banana war, for example, which is very nice also.
No, I would go to Sipo and ask her, like, on short terms, one, what's your aim? What do you want to do on really short term? Maybe like just give us, for example, 2014, end of 2014, what do you want to achieve?
Fantastic. Thank you. So first I want all of you to remember when you leave here what the food politics is about, at least some of the key points. It's about the prices, getting fair prices for smallholder farmers, the land rights, you've already heard about land governance. It's about climate change and resilience. And who are the most disenfranchised on all of these issues? Prices, land rights, climate change. It's the smallholder farmers. So we want to make sure that they're protected, they're better off, and that's what the Do Agri campaign is all about. So talking about 2014, what I'd like to ask all of you in this room is to go to our website, www.one, which is ONE.org, and sign the campaign. Just help us to move it, and it's very exciting. There's a music video there that we've just produced with 19 artists, 19 African artists. It's like a We Are the World type of music video. They're singing in 10 languages. They're from 11 countries, and they're helping us to push the African governments to invest in their people. And if you can do that, you will have helped 400 million African farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonella, how is globalization killing biodiversity?
That's a $1 million and not easy to respond immediately, but just to give you an example, in the past 100 years, we lost about 75% of biodiversity. Now, what has this to do with our life today? I'll give you a simple example from the Andaman Island when the tsunami was there. Okay? First of all, the tribes recognized that the tsunami was coming, and they ran up to the mountains because they recognized the signs of nature, which we cannot recognize anymore, and it doesn't matter the high technology we can put in place, we were not able to understand that a tsunami was coming, and indigenous peoples could. What did they do after the tsunami? Because the water, which had flooded the lands, was saline. This was sea, so no crop could be there. But India had 6,000 varieties of rice. And this tribe had a rice resistant to salt. And that's the rice they planted. These are the seeds they planted those years to have their harvest. Now, why is this important to us today? Because we are very insecure. If tomorrow the supermarket will shut down, we will starve because we don't have our own land to grow our crops. So the story I would like you to tell the world is the story of diversity and why biodiversity is very important. And you can start from October. I invite you, please go, for instance, to Terra Madre, Salone del Gusto in Torino, where we will be there with indigenous peoples' communities and food communities. And the hope is that indigenous peoples are well organized at the UN. There will be a UN conference. At IFAD, we will have an Indigenous Peoples Forum. So come and tell the stories. Our doors are open, and material on Indigenous Peoples issue and IFAD is over there. Thank you.
Okay. Fred, climate change, very last question. California is facing a water problem, you know, and this may lead all the discussion about the climate change. Our media are just influenced when, for example, tsunami or something that touches Western countries gets into the media agenda.
Yeah, there's nothing like a story that hits home in California, or maybe if it were actually to touch us here in Italy, if we could understand food insecurity in a much more visceral way. Absolutely. I think the thought I'd like to leave us with is that eventually these issues that we're discussing in Africa are going to become more and more evident to everybody, including those of us lucky enough to live in the developed world. And so to catch this story at this point is to catch a wave at a very early point. You have to realize that the basic statistic is rather grim, which is that by 2050, we're going to see about 2 billion more people on this planet. And that effectively is going to mean, what with dietary changes across the world, is that we will effectively have to double food production by 2050. And by 2050, in those coming years, we're basically going to have to produce, what was that statistic I heard? The same amount as all the food ever produced in the history of mankind will have to be produced again from now until 2050 in order to feed those people on the planet. There's going to be increased pressure across the world on price, on the environment, and it's a looming crisis. It's not going away. They're not making any new land the last time I checked.
And Ian, just shortly, just give us your dream, or if a dream, what you would like 2020 to be. How would you?
2020.
Yeah.
We have a dream. Yeah, 5 years' time. That's awfully close. I guess one of the things that I would like people to do is probably a little bit like what Fred was mentioning, to realize what kind of situation we're in. And my dream would be able to probably a little bit more easily address the triple challenge that we have. Why is it triple? Because, I mean, you know, all in Haiti, the government changed because of civil unrest. And we've heard about the Arab Spring. Now, that wasn't all caused by food, but a lot of it was. So food is important to us, it's important to everybody. And my dream would be is for us to, and you as storytellers, as looking at your careers in terms of what's exciting out there, is that we really do, my dream would be is that we could all rally behind everybody not having to worry about where their next meal is going to come from. That's us in this room, and that's everybody outside. That's my dream.
Thank you. Se ci sono domande ora, penso sia il momento per lasciarvi dello spazio. Prego.
Buongiorno. Una domanda relativamente al commercio ecosolidale e vorrei capire se il commercio ecosolidale che negli ultimi 30 anni si è sviluppato parecchio ha un effettivo impatto nella vita dei produttori del sud del mondo o se è solamente un metodo per noi che ci chiediamo da dove viene la nostra colazione di ripulirci la coscienza.
Ok, raccogliamo qualche domanda, la vuoi indirizzare a qualcuno specifico? Ok, perfetto. Raccogliamo qualche altra domanda? Qui? Prego.
What's the position of IFID about GMO?
Okay. You take it? Okay, okay. Qui,
I had two questions and one first specification. I don't know if I understood correctly. Did you say that food production has to increase by 50% in the next 8 years or so? Because that's a story that we've been told by OECD and many others. But the untold story is about food waste, because we waste 30 to 50%. And actually, if you are to increase by 50% food production with the methods that we're using today, and you're thinking that of that 50%, you're still wasting 30 to 50, that just makes not complete sense because of the resources that go into there and they're going to waste. But my question was, it seems to me like there's two parallel stories when we talk about the current food production in the world. So here today we have the positive stories, and I'm completely on the side of many of the things that have been told about smallholder farmings and preserving biodiversity. But then you have another story, which is even supported by big organizations. So for instance, FAO or G8. And they are about linking smallholder farmers to global value chains and financializing more food production and globalizing food system even more. And the question is, and when you look into those documents, for instance, the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which is an alliance of investment by the G8 countries, already 10 African countries, and many big private interests like Cargill, Syngenta, Monsanto, and so on, when you look at the requirements for the contracting governments, is about changing their land tenure, their seed policies in favor of these big private interests. So I'm asking, as people that are interested in this question, and as journalists or future journalists, who is it that we should really trust? Both stories, one side, or what? And then my second question, I'll be very quick, is that the EPO, the European Patenting Office, is sending out patents for Monsanto especially, on everything, even on the rationale that Monsanto is the best position to find seeds which are climate ready. So for instance, they patented soybeans because then Monsanto would research and find the most climate ready soybean variety to then sell it on the market. So how is this possible as Europe? And what can civil society, lobbying, what can we do really to stop this? Thank you.
Okay, we start from those three questions and we link the one on OMG with the globalization and things. Who wants to start?
I'll go if you like.
Okay.
I don't know, do you want me to address the three questions, or do you want me to just one of them?
The one addressed to IFA, then the last one about.
All right. I think, just to come back to your context question, I appreciate them. The issue is that today, a world population of about 7.2 billion expected to increase another 2 billion to 9.2 by 2050. This is given current estimates of population growth. At this moment, we know that enough food is produced to feed everybody, but of course the biggest problem is that, and I never really liked that comment very much, because what does it mean? It means, well, great, we produce enough food, but if there are a billion people of 7 billion today that don't have enough because they don't have enough money to buy it or it's not available, that kind of comment is not very useful, because we can't ship the food. If we had surpluses in Italy or surpluses in any part of the world, we don't have enough money to be able to buy it, to ship it, and to pay insurance and freight for it. So what's the solution to that? They have to grow food where they live. People have to help themselves. And that's why an organization like IFAD exists. And of course, we are deeply concerned about the issue of where's the food going to come from. And that's why we're trying to help people grow food where they live. The amount that has to be increased is 50% more food. That's the number that Fred was referring to, is that all of the food that was being produced by humanity up until this moment, that same amount has to be increased again. Now, let me relate that to the issue on the private sector. At this moment, governments provide development assistance in the order of $130 to $140 billion. How much of that goes to agriculture to help address this food problem? If we're lucky, it's 5% of that money. So when we look at the problems of the world at IFAD, and we work with the private sector, and we hope to work more with the private sector, we do look for people like you who are concerned about how do we work with the private sector? Can we trust the private sector? Now, everything that we do today is mostly, with the exception unless we happen to live on welfare, most of what we do today is run by the private sector. The small-scale farmers that we're supporting are private sector. We want them, and this is obviously an issue of trust. And we think that at IFAD we have developed that trust, or where we can negotiate with the large private sector to ensure that they, the small farmers, can establish a partnership and a relationship. Why? Because, I mean, think about it. If we have to find enough ways that we can increase productivity, increase production to meet that demand, obviously we'll try to deal with the best that we can so that population doesn't grow as fast as it has. But we need to feed people, and people need to feed themselves. So we see partnership with the private sector not as something as the evil empire. We see the importance of us knowing how best we can help governments deal with issues of land grabbing, help governments deal with issues of GMOs so that they have the in-house capacity to make decisions for themselves. It's the same in Italy and in Europe, different to the United States and Canada and other parts of the world. Governments need to have their own regulatory processes to be able to say, do we want GMOs? No, we don't want GMOs. And you have movements that will help those governments make those decisions.
Fred, do you want to add something before we go on Fred and Troy?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the question about patenting food, which is that I think there's a very strong sense, and this is following up what Ian is saying, which is that the private sector needs to be in charge of innovation, and that if there's not a profit stream heading their way, there will be no innovation in food. And this kind of leads to this whole notion, which we're borrowing from the tech sector now, which is that, well, we've got a problem with production is the idea. We need to produce more food. What we need is a food killer app. Like we need a waterless seed. We need some sort of technological fix. And I guess, you know, what Antonella is actually pointing to is the fact that is that a lot of those fixes are already out there if we can just understand and respect biodiversity. And I think that the essence is that there has to be a push, if I can put on my activist hat for a moment now as opposed to my journalistic hat, there has to be a push towards patent reform, and that the patent laws have to be reformed in such a way so that there's less profit and money stream heading towards large large transnationals. And it's not even specifically GMO, non-GMO, hybrid, non-hybrid seeds. I think when it comes time when people are hungry, I think people care less and less and less what precisely is the nature of the DNA within the plant substance. What I think is important is where that money is heading and global equity in terms of global farming.
Antonella, on fair trade.
Thank you for your question. Now, for indigenous peoples particularly, fair trade has been one of the ways out. I don't have the statistics, but for instance, I'm one of those who goes and buy fair trade stuff, and what I find there is that I can find indigenous food. I can find, for instance, organic quinoa. I can find kheer. I can find those food that yesterday evening we were calling them like power foods because they are highly nutritional. And this is another aspect we were not able to touch today. But even in the fair trade, I think there are very good experience and less good experiences. What I can tell about it is that the fair trade has helped a lot the small communities, the small women enterprises, particularly because it advances money. Now, one of the problems for many smallholder farmers is credit. Okay, they cannot access money to the banks. What the fair trade has done, based on trust and based on how they accompany and build the capacity of the small enterprises, particularly women, they advance, let's say, 40% of the entire products that they will give at the end. And this has helped a lot. But even there, I mean, who gains and what is really fair about the trade? There are good stories and bad stories at the same time.
Can I address the issue of food waste? I'm sorry, that sort of missed that one. I think it's fair to say that I guess in the last 30 years, it's true that we have not put a lot of attention on the issue of food waste and loss. Within development assistance, again, this is not something that would be supported separately or differently. I mean, when we're talking about farmers being able to consume from their own production, marketing, but preserving some of their own food, the last thing we want is for them, for their grain, which happens in maize a lot, where 30 to 40% of what they store is lost through insects. And of course, we'd be concerned about them using fungicides to avoid that to be lost or from insects. But there is, to assure you, there is a lot more attention as the world is moving towards what you must have read about, and if you haven't, you should, which is from the Millennium Development Goals, now we're going to new Sustainable Development Goals beyond 2015 towards 2030. So the dream of getting not till 2020, but to get to 2030. And so far, the negotiations between countries is that the issue of food loss and waste, largely supported by the Rome-based agencies who have put a submission forward for advice to the member states who are negotiating this, food loss and waste is an important priority there. And it is true that a lot of the waste is in supermarkets because we as consumers like to see fresh food. So the minute that the lettuce, for example, looks wilted, it's thrown away. So a lot of the loss in richer countries is something that's part of our eating culture and habits and our purchasing capacity. But in poor countries, I can assure you that we are paying much more attention to this and that we've been more concerned about growing more food than avoid that same food, which you correctly say, is being lost. And so therefore, to meet the food needs of the future, this is an important element.
So just to add, can you hear me? Good. So just to add to the point about, food perishing and food waste and all of that, And true, there's the issue of food being wasted in the West, as Ian has just pointed out. But the real tragedy is the post-harvest losses in Africa. Sometimes as much as 40%. So even in Africa, where there's so much need for food, the food is perishing. And that's why, I come back to this campaign that I want everyone to join. We are pushing African governments to invest in helping smallholder farmers. And part of that investment means infrastructure. So the food is perishing because there are no good roads to move the food to the market. The food is perishing because there is no infrastructure for refrigeration and processing and the whole sort of value chain and agribusiness. So it's a deeper story that needs to be told. So we're not just saying, put money on the table. We're focusing very specifically on smart policy interventions like infrastructure, provide the roads, provide the transportation, provide the market information and the markets, and provide the infrastructure for processing and preventing the losses.
Yeah, I mean, if I could
storage is important.
Just add something very quickly to this story, which is that, one of the great anti-hunger technologies is grain. The idea that wheat or corn will last for years. And so instead of having these very high-tech solutions, to follow what Sipo is saying, if you're able to mill grain into flour and then store it effectively, it will last a hell of a long time. These are very simple technologies that will have tremendous impact.
Okay, another bunch of questions very fast.
I have to answer.
Okay, go Massimo. Sorry, Massimo.
Very quick. Ci sono delle attività, secondo me, che nel prossimo futuro saranno da considerare di rilevanza sociale, perché questo pianeta non collassi. E se aumentiamo di 2 miliardi la popolazione, questo pianeta rischia, se continua così, di collassare. Non vorrei io ho la mia paura che invece si porti il pianeta vicino sull'orlo del collasso e poi qualcuno dica: ci sono le multinazionali e i crops geneticamente modificati, vi salveremo noi. E allora tutta un'altra cosa. Scusa.
Prego, no.
I'm so sorry if I talk in Italian, but sometimes
okay.
I didn't understand both languages, of course. The young people in Italy now, they speak very well.
Altre domande? Lì, prendiamo quella.
Al volo sul commercio equo e solidale, posso? Il commercio equo e solidale, il problema è vorrei capire che controlli ci sono, che controlli ci sono. I would like to understand which control there are for this, because when I see in the market the biological banana, frankly, I tell to my wife not to buy, because not to buy, nobody knows. Buy the other, this is cost less, in the sometime are exactly the same.
Credo che quello che avete affrontato questa mattina sia un argomento estremamente, oserei dire, vitale di qui e in avanti. Quello che mi sento di vedere e di fotografare, che è stato visto e interpretato la problematica su vari livelli. Quello dei 1000 giorni del bambino è una conseguenza di tutto quello che viene poi successivamente. Io quello che in parte conosco da un punto di vista professionale, credo che in Europa ci sia il know-how per aiutare queste società.
Le devo chiedere però la domanda.
Prego. No, la domanda è: io credo che non sia un problema tecnico, il problema tecnico a livello agronomico, sementi, meccanizzazioni, sono know-how che sono ben radicati nelle società evolute. Io credo che sia propriamente un problema politico. Allora chiedo quanto la forza politica
quotidiana è un elemento di guerre, è un elemento di lotte tra multinazionali, è un elemento di sviluppo. E lo faremo con Frederick Kaufman, autore di Bad Farm. Si è occupato di politiche alimentari per NBC, Fox, professore di giornalismo alla City University di New York. Lo faremo con Massimo Alberizzi, che è direttore di African Express, è una firma del Corriere, inviato speciale in Africa per tanti anni. È stato un consulente per le Nazioni Unite per quanto riguarda le armi in Somalia. Lo faremo con Ian McGillivray, consigliere particolare del presidente dell'IFAD. Ian ha 35 anni di esperienza nelle politiche di sviluppo agricolo e rurale. La sua esperienza, la sua condivisione di quello che ha visto nel corso di quegli anni sarà un tassello fondamentale, così come sarà un tassello fondamentale quello che ci dirà Sipo Moyo, direttrice per l'Africa di One. Sipo lavora da 18 anni nel campo dello sviluppo. La sua lunga esperienza nella Banca Africana dello Sviluppo, nelle Nazioni Unite, alla Banca Mondiale, sarà un elemento, di un punto di vista fuori dal coro, di quello che spesso i media non riescono neanche a raccontare. Abbiamo Antonella Cardone, consulente tecnico dell'IFAD e coordinatrice per le questioni indigene e tribali, che ci porterà ancora un altro punto di vista, cioè ci lascerà abbandonare dietro di noi quelle che sono le definizioni classiche dietro le quali nascondiamo il termine di indigeno e tribale. Finito questo breve giro di presentazioni, ricordo l'ultima cosa e lo ricordo prima di uscire. Se volete ci sono delle borse e delle descrizioni dell'IFAD, del lavoro che fa l'IFAD, sono vicino alla porta, quindi a fine panel se volete approfondire abbiamo a disposizione. Struttureremo questo panel in questo modo, ci sarà un primo giro di domande con i relatori e ad un certo punto vorrei che foste anche voi ad intervenire, a condividere con noi quelli che sono i vostri dubbi, le vostre sensazioni su quello che avete ascoltato. I was just wondering, now we have to switch in English, and I would like to start from Fred. Yes, we said yesterday, I can call you Fred. The panel is called Untold Stories. Why are those stories untold by the media? What's happening and why we should tell them, why we should talk about it?
Thank you, Francesco. The food story, maybe 20 years ago, when I started writing, was a much simpler and more direct story, and it dealt specifically with what we eat and how we eat it and how we prepare.
We're missing a chair. We're missing a chair. I think we're good. One, two, three, four. There's one at the end. There's one at the end. Oh, that's right. Are these suckers on? They're ready? Channel 0? We're good? Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Francesco, you have to move. There you go. And then I'll take this chair. Yes, exactly. You see that. We're doing girl, boy, girl. You missed that bit.
Francesco, 5 minutes. Everybody.
Salve, prima di tutto grazie per essere qui stamattina. Sappiamo che è un orario molto presto, di domenica mattina, quindi un ringraziamento veramente speciale per essere qui con noi. Prima di iniziare 2 paroline. La prima, il panel sarà quasi completamente in inglese, quindi ci sono fuori delle cuffie con i traduttori simultanei, se ne avete bisogno penso che sia il caso di andarli a prendere ora prima che iniziamo. Il secondo punto, una presentazione necessaria. Cos'è IFAD? IFAD è un'agenzia delle Nazioni Unite, è l'unica agenzia delle Nazioni Unite che si occupa che ha un portafoglio finanziario, si occupa di concedere prestiti per lo sviluppo agricolo. È un'agenzia specializzata per l'incremento delle attività agricole nei Paesi membri. I paesi membri dell'IFAD sono 181, è un'agenzia che esiste da oltre 30 anni e ogni anno concede prestiti per circa $1 miliardo. Siamo oggi qui in un panel di persone molto esperte, persone che hanno vissuto sulla propria pelle quelle che sono le politiche agricole, che possono raccontare le storie non raccontate delle politiche agricole. Perché questo panel è importante? La prima domanda. Perché quello che avete mangiato stamattina a colazione è quello di cui parleremo qui oggi. Come spesso tutto ciò che viene sottovalutato, ovvero la nostra alimentazione.
That's something that we were a little bit feeling really, really good when we saw more people coming into this room. We were worried that maybe there'd only be 2 or 3 of you. So first, let me applaud you for being here, but let me also get you to reflect a little bit what it was like for you this morning. Some of you probably missed breakfast. Breakfast is obviously something that came from habit, part of our culture, but also because we were hungry. And probably many of you didn't really think about where that food came from. You didn't have to worry about whether or not you were going to be able to eat. And I'm doing this only mainly for you to relate to food from the perspective of this being something that we, luckily, who are here, don't really have to worry too much about that. I'm sure that many of you have friends and colleagues who don't have jobs and worry about how to get food on the table and how to make sure that we can meet our daily needs. But the fact that you are here today means that something very important happened to you as you were growing up, meaning that you had good brain development, you were able to, like all of us, think and reason and go to school and learn. There are many who are not so lucky. And the sad thing is, I guess those of us who are parents, especially mothers, know that mothers, when one suddenly becomes pregnant, planned or not, it's important from that moment on, before giving birth, that one has all of the nutrients you need, not only for the mother, but for the child. The point I'm trying to make here is that food has to be there for the mother, for the father, for the children. But it's fundamental, especially for the newborn child. And there is a window, and it's a magic window, because if you add up the days of the 9 months of pregnancy, more or less, and then the 2 years following birth, that makes about 1,000 days. If during those 1,000 days the children don't get enough micronutrients, they don't get enough vitamins and minerals, enough carbohydrates and proteins coming through, if you like, the umbilical cord while the baby is pregnant, or later on following breastfeeding up until the 2 years, that child will have learning disabilities, that child will have problems of thinking and educating and to be educated. So beyond this being a human problem of
inherit, but since then, with the advent of the notion of food politics, it's become a much more complicated story, and particularly with the notion of climate change coming into the mix, what we're seeing is the idea of global scarcity coming back the way it first occurred in the late 1960s. And so when there is scarcity, all of a sudden food becomes a different story. And part of the story that I've been covering is the money story. Because when something is scarce, then all of a sudden it can cost more. And all of a sudden, all sorts of people who are not necessarily interested in food become interested. And I mean like Wall Street bankers, large multinational investors. So a typical example of the untold story of food then would be last year when I was traveled to Ethiopia, to the conflict zone near Gambela in South Sudan, to follow the land investment of an Arab sheikh named Mohammed al-Amaoudai, who's one of the richest men on earth, who is involved in a land grab right now in southern western Ethiopia. Because the food story and the energy story and the money story and the water story have all become one story. And so this gentleman is in the process of taking hundreds of thousands of hectares of land in a country where there are millions of hungry people and using that land to farm and to send that water from the Nile Basin encapsulated in grains of rice to feed his compatriots in Saudi Arabia. So all of a sudden, the food story becomes a political story. It becomes a money story. It becomes a story of indigenous populations who have been marginalized in Gambela. It becomes a story of climate change. It becomes a story of internal and external foreign affairs and foreign exchange. And so I guess that's what we're getting at here, Francesco, that the food story, as we progress in these times, has become a much more complicated, in-depth, and really one of the extraordinary stories of our time.
Thanks, Fred. Ian, one of the things that we discussed yesterday is that often we use the word out of sight, out of mind. This framework leads Western countries sometimes to not consider what's happening in rural areas and do not consider all the problem of small farmers in rural areas. Would you talk a little bit about this and what we could do?
Sure. This is on for the translators anyway. Well, let me start off by I think congratulating you for being here on a Sunday morning. That's at this moment we have 160 million children in the world who are at this stage that we call it stunting. It's a characteristic of a child being too short for its age, and there are many ways that one can try to see what the magnitude of the problem is. But beyond you here saying, well, why is this important to me? Well, the unfortunate circumstance is that most of these children and most of the hundreds of millions of people who do worry about where their next meal is going to come from, they live in faraway places. And as they live in faraway places, we say, well, why is that relevant to me? It's not nearby. So you can care about them if we have a human feeling. There's another important reason why they're important. In my career, I've realized that if you help people where they are, and they grow and they prosper, they, like us, may want to travel, but the important thing is that people find opportunities often where they live, maybe like 100, 200 years ago. And I think for us, in a world where movement is important, trade is important, I think the important thing to realize is that helping people prosper and grow where they live is a natural human tendency. And therefore, my trying to make the connection is that we can say, well, these people are too far away, so we shouldn't worry about them. The important thing is that not only do we have human caring, but we care about them being able to live a good life where they live. Thank you.
Sipo, as Ian said, normally we don't care about our breakfast. Like people in this room probably know, we just wake up and have breakfast, don't even think about it. So when we don't think about it, in a way you may do not care where the food comes from and do not understand if we do any mistake, meaning like as Western countries, in our food policies or helping other countries with their food policies. Could you tell us any big mistake or bunch of mistakes made by Western countries in trying to hate countries with food problems?
Thank you, Francesco. Good morning, everyone. So I'm here to bring you the stories, the untold stories of those faraway people that Ian just talked about.
Mike.
Okay, is it better? Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm here to bring you the stories of those faraway people that Ian just mentioned about. And one of those faraway places is Africa, and that's where I come from. And because today we're talking about the politics of food, it is actually a political issue. And we all know what happens in politics. You have lobby groups, and you have